Good to be with you this morning. You'll notice candlesticks behind me because we are now doing our early service in the church. So candles once again on our altar. Well, whenever I hear this particular parable, my initial impulse is always to sympathize with the bridesmaids who don't have enough oil. Why is this entitled bridegroom making them wait for such a long time? Why don't the better prepared bridesmaids just share their oil? Maybe those who didn't bring a flask couldn't afford a full supply of oil. There could be real issues of injustice at play here. It feels unfair that the inadequately prepared bridesmaids end up being shut out of the wedding banquet completely. This isn't the Jesus we know, is it? He would never want to exclude anyone, would he? Well, as much as I immediately want to sympathize with the poorly prepared bridesmaids, I also can't help but wonder, why couldn't they come prepared? Is there really economic injustice at play here, as we might presume? Or is something else perhaps going on? Is this parable perhaps talking about something deeper, maybe even something far more mysterious? Perhaps this parable is also trying to ask something of us, its hearers. Perhaps this parable is even asking us, why? Why haven't you come prepared? Why don't you come prepared? Why won't you come prepared? And of course, we might give any number of good reasons that we're not prepared. Life is complicated. We have lots of things on our mind. We are busy and often overwhelmed. And we know that God is merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. God's expectations aren't that high, are they? And I think that's where we've gotten just a little confused. We've confused God's infinite mercy with God having low expectations. A more accurate read of the situation, I think, would be that God's hopes are so high and God's expectations so incredible that few of us would even bother trying without the promise of a safety net, without a whole lot of protective gear, without God's grace as our rear guard. The essayist Annie Dillard wonders along these lines about our collective approach to Sunday mornings. She says, "Why do people in church often seem like cheerful tourists on a packaged tour of the absolute? Does anyone have the foggiest idea what sort of power we blithely invoke? Or, as I suspect, does no one believe a word of it? Churches are like children playing on the floor with their chemistry sets, mixing up a batch of TNT to kill a Sunday morning. It is madness to wear ladies' straw hats and velvet hats to church. We should all be wearing crash helmets. Ushers should issue life preservers and signal flares. They should lash us to our pews. For the sleeping God may wake someday and take offense, or the waking God may draw us to where we can never return." And so, reflecting again upon our parable, I wonder, what kind of preparation is being asked of us? And what are we even preparing for? In many ways, this text feels like it's beckoning us into an early Advent. Keep awake. A theme we'll hear again and again over the next few weeks. Keep awake. But for what and for whom? We remind ourselves every time we celebrate the Eucharist, which I know some of you haven't done for a long time, but you probably still remember. When I say, "Let us proclaim the mystery of faith," you say, "Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again." Christ will come again. We wait for Christ's second coming. It's not something we tend to spend much time on. We leave the second coming to fundamentalists. But I think that's a mistake. Christ's work among us certainly isn't finished yet. We are not yet reconciled with God and with one another. And if this election season has shown us anything, it's certainly that. Reconciliation is still a long way off. There is much pain among us, much brokenness in need of healing. Indeed, we have grown so accustomed to our divisions that we often forget how greatly it grieves God to see the human family so bitterly divided. And we must not, I believe, let the familiarity of our divisions dull us to their corrosive power. Because, of course, God making things right, Christ coming again, will never simply or easily coincide with a particular political party being in power. Rather, God making all things right is about those with presumptively irreconcilable differences eventually finding a way to sit together at table. And not just sit together, but somehow manage to enjoy, even delight in, one another's company. And this is not the world we live in, not yet at least. We are so far from this world that it can feel almost impossible to imagine this kind of healing, this kind of wholeness. And yet we are called to just this kind of imagination: radical, holy, disruptive, surprising, rabble-rousing imagination, kingdom imagination. We are called to keep awake for the coming of the kingdom, even here, even now, watching and waiting for glimpses of healing and wholeness, watching and waiting for opportunities to become agents of healing and wholeness, watching and waiting for the great unveiling that is still yet to come. So keep awake and come prepared. Bring enough oil for however long it takes until the bridegroom comes. Bring enough oil to dispel the shadows of hatred and resentment, to help us see one another ever more clearly as beloved and redeemable children of God. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning, so that we might all gather and await the bridegroom together, singing and feasting and dancing while we wait, knowing that the bridegroom comes to marry heaven and earth and to mend everything that has been broken. May it be so. Amen.